that report from our education editor, Bramman Jeffries, who joins us now on the sofa, alongside Ruth Perry's sister, Professor Julia Walters. Good morning to both of you. Julia, can I ask you to start with, you've been wanting change within Ofsted into the rating system and how it works. These proposals today, is it good enough? Does it go far enough?
Yes. I just hope that the government now realise how untenable their position of hanging on to those harmful and reductive single word judgments are, and actually make the changes that are needed to keep teachers and therefore children safe in schools.
So you want them to act on this report?
I want them to act. I've had, I think, 18 hours of meetings now with the DFE, the Department for Education, and Gillian Keegan this last year. They have made some changes, but they don't go far enough. I've been arguing that. And the one key thing that would make the most sort of appreciable change would be to get rid of single word judgment. So come on, get up, Gillian Keegan, and make those changes now, please.
So in those 18 hours where you have sat, I'm assuming, face to face with these people, how do they counter your arguments? I'm interested to know what they say to you about why we don't know when this is going to happen.
It's the same lines all the time about parents appreciate clarity and simplicity when deciding on which school to choose for their child. And my argument always is, one, parents don't generally have that much choice. What they want is their local school to be good enough. And two, that these words, one word can never sum up a school, let alone a horrible word like inadequate. And it doesn't help parents to be treated like imbeciles, really, that they can't read a report, they can't see beyond one word to look at the details and make the decisions for themselves. But yes, the DFE's argument all the way through is this: it's simple, it's clear, and it's what they do across hospitals and care homes and prisons and so on. And so, no, they need to stick with it.
Bramman, it was interesting in your piece there, hearing from those schools in Leeds, where the significance of a word and the word changing very rapidly and the impact that can have.
And what really struck me about that was Kate, the deputy head we just heard from. That word inadequate, which I know really weighed on your sister's mind, also weighed on hers. And she found herself writing it out time and time again, thinking, am I inadequate? Mm-hmm. I'm trying my best in a job. What's very striking about this report from MPs is the language it uses, describing a system that they heard was toxic, and saying that the word that head teachers used most often was terror. Yeah. So very powerful that although people think there has to be a school inspection system, the MPs are really clear. Parents need that. They need good, clear, reliable information, that the system at the moment needs fundamental change, according to this report.
That's what I'd like to talk to you about, Julie, because what else needs to change? The one word is obviously hugely significant. Bramman mentioned, was it the word you said terror? Then, how else could inspections be different?
Well, I think the Parliamentary Enquiry's report lays out some really important key changes that need to come in to make the inspection system reliable, dependable, and less dangerous, less terrifying for teachers. The high stakes that now currently hang on an inadequate or two requires improvement judgments that mean that there's generally a forced academisation and head teachers lose their jobs, after, on the basis of the say-so of a couple of inspectors on 2 days, irrelevant, disregarding whatever the parents might think about the school and the head. So that, they've said that needs to stop. There needs to be a range of options. And the other thing that I think is really key is the criticism of the current complaint procedure, the lack of any independent complaints procedure, which has allowed Ofsted far too long to be completely unaccountable. It won't listen to criticism because it doesn't allow criticisms. And if you don't listen to criticism, if you don't listen to feedback, how are you going to learn? How are you going to make improvements? If they had listened to criticisms over the years about inspectors' conduct about the terror that head teachers feel, they might have learnt, and my sister might be here today.
There is a new chief inspector at Ofsted, isn't there, who has set a slightly different tone and mood in his public comments. Does that give you optimism?
Yes, it does. I've met Martin Oliver, and we had a long and frank meeting, and he genuinely seems committed to change. He recognises that Ofsted has lost the trust of the teaching profession, and that needs to change, and it needs to change by bringing in these reforms that will make head teachers and teachers have confidence in the system, and therefore will be a system that parents themselves can believe in.
And Branwen, this is your job day in, day out, talking to people in education. Do you feel like change is coming?
It certainly feels as though this is a bit of a turning point and there's real momentum for change. The government has to respond to this report from a committee which has a majority of Conservative MPs, and the MPs are very clear that there's a consensus for change now. And I think, John, you're right, that the new chief inspector set a different tone, and some of the things that this report is suggesting he's already promised to look at. And he wants to hear from parents. He's going to launch a big consultation in a couple of months' time. So parents will have their chance to say, what do they want? Do they want deeper, more informative reports, which this report from MP suggests they do?
We know from our inbox that when we talk about this, we do get quite a lot of parents get in touch, say, you know what, I'm never in a busy life going to look through a whole report. I like the simplicity and the clarity of a one-word judgment because it gives me a headline and it makes it digestible. What do you say to them, Julia?
I would say, as the inquiry report says, that no school should be judged inadequate on the basis of minor clerical errors that can be put right before the report comes out. So by the time the Caversham Primary report came out, those really flimsy issues on which that inadequate judgment was based had already gone. It already wasn't inadequate. So how was that report ever helpful to the parents of Caversham Primary who knew Ruth, who knew the school, who flocked in their numbers to get their children into that school? They never believed that judgment. So I think it's, if you haven't got time to read a report, parent, then, it's lazy. And it's not really a good excuse. The reports are only about 6 pages and quite flimsy as they are. If you haven't got time to read through that and look at more detail, well, that's your lookout. But it's not for the government to decide to simplify things for you.
Yeah. I think one of the key things to remember is inspections used to take a week with maybe 5 or 6 inspectors. Now it's 2 days and they're really rushed and they've got maybe a day to write it up. And that's one of the questions that MPs are asking. If you really want to help parents, should we inspect schools less often if we know they're doing well, but go in and spend more time, get to know the school and give a broader range of information? It's also worth saying that the Labour Party are proposing a report card system. So you would have a summary, but with strengths and weaknesses. And it may be that is one of the ideas that will bubble up.
Kirsten O'Brien, BBC Radio Berkshire.
12 minutes past 7 now. BBC Radio Berkshire. MPs are calling on the government to scrap the current system of 1- and 2-word judgments of schools in Ofsted inspections. The report by the Education Select Committee was commissioned after the death of the Caversham head teacher Ruth Perry. She killed herself after her primary school was rated as inadequate. Well, after hearing a wide range of evidence, the committee also says no school should be judged inadequate on safeguarding alone unless fundamentally failing. BBC's Branwen Jeffries, education editor, reports.
The head teacher and deputy of a small primary in Leeds, both leaving their jobs because of Ofsted. Their school went from good to inadequate and back to good again last year, an experience they told me broke their trust in the system.
It was a moment in time that I'll never forget. It was a moment in time when I looked over at my deputy Kate and I could see in her eyes, I'm sure she could see in mine, that this was it. this is actually happening to us. And it was a heart-sinking moment. It was incredibly difficult, incredibly emotional for me, and incredibly lonely.
The impact of having ourselves described as inadequate was traumatic, and is something that will always be there, and is one of the main things that has stayed with me from the process.
In June last year, inspectors visited. They didn't like the record keeping on children's welfare. Everything else was good, but the whole school was labelled inadequate.
Because what subheadings do we have left to do?
For staff and families at the school, the judgment was a shock. Within 3 months, the school was re-inspected, this time judged good overall. There was no evidence any child had been at risk. Today, MPs say this kind of judgment is wrong. They call for 1 or 2 word judgments of schools to go. Inadequate judgments on safeguarding only where a school is fundamentally failing to keep children safe. With less frequent, more detailed inspections for good schools and more effort to capture parents' views. Overall, MPs say school inspection needs to work for parents and for schools.
What we heard is that trust has come to a low ebb in recent years, that there is a need to rebuild trust with the profession. And I think following the tragic events at Caversham Primary and the death of Ruth Perry and what we've seen from the coroner's inquiry there, I think there is a need to reassure the profession around the role of Ofsted, and that Ofsted takes teacher and leader welfare very seriously.
If you're a parent, there's a good reason that you should care about this. Head teachers are leaving their jobs early because of the pressure. Not enough people want to step up to do the job. And we know that who leads a school makes a huge difference to the pupils.
I think there needs to be a systematic rethink of the approach that Ofsted take. The one-word judgments need to be not in existence.
That's a decision only ministers can make. Labour say they would move to a report card for schools. Some changes are already happening in school inspection, but it feels like bigger ones may be on the horizon.
Kirsten O'Brien, BBC Radio Berkshire.
8 minutes past 8 now. MPs are calling on the government to scrap the current system of 1- and 2-word judgments of schools in Ofsted inspections. The report by the Education Select Committee was commissioned after the death of the Caversham head teacher Ruth Perry. She killed herself after her primary school was rated as inadequate. Well, after hearing a wide range of evidence, the committee also says no school should be judged inadequate on safeguarding alone unless fundamentally failing. Jeff Barton is from the Association of School and College Leaders and asked him what he made of the report.
It's a landmark report from an Education Select Committee, and it's worth remembering an Education Select Committee isn't a single party in Parliament, it's a range of parties, it's cross-party, and therefore you've got the depth of different MPs from different backgrounds asking experts, what do we think about Ofsted? And I think what's interesting in that report you've just heard is a recognition that inspection isn't just about teachers and the quality of teaching, it must be there for parents. And what we've seen, particularly in the most tragic of circumstances near you, is that has had a devastating effect on the teaching profession. And we need to be able to recruit our best teachers, our best leaders to go to all kinds of schools, and Ofsted is preventing some of them from doing that. And today's report says something significant needs to change. So I'm cautiously optimistic about that.
On that, though, particularly parents like myself who, I don't have any knowledge of the education system, we used to sort of lean quite heavily on those 1-word, 2-word judgments. Do we need to be re-educated in some way to not lean like we did on those?
Well, I wouldn't call it re-educating parents, but I would say that parents probably need to be aware that if in the past you saw that a school was outstanding or it was good, I was a head teacher for 15 years, my school was rated as good, right? The way it was being rated 15 years ago 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and now has changed so many times. So the last time I was inspected, I said to the inspector at the end of it, I hope you don't mind me saying this, you might as well have stayed at home and phoned this in, because essentially what you've done is to look at our results and then give us a judgment based on the results. Now that's gone. That went 4 or 5 years ago. Now what they're looking at is what happens in the classroom, which many parents would think should be what it was always about, but also this safeguarding thing. And you heard Bramwell Jeffries, your education editor, saying very clearly that school in Leeds, a bit like in Caversham, for that school to be moved to be seen as inadequate because of what was largely an administrative error. What must that feel like if you are the head and the deputy in a small school that you are being branded inadequate? Now, I don't think any parent who might have relied on inspection reports in the past would think that is a humane way to treat human beings. And if there's a problem with a safeguarding record, well, the inspector should say, there's a problem with your safeguarding record. Can you put it right, please? That's now, I understand from the new chief inspector, the way they will approach things. But frankly, that should have been happening all of those years ago. And parents are now seeing what behind the scenes has needed to be put right.
That's Jeff Barton from the Association of School and College Leaders. Our education editor, Bramwell Jeffries, joins me now. Morning, Bramwell. Unlike other inquiries, this one seems to have gone quite fast, has it?
Well, all the evidence was heard by MPs last autumn, and they heard from voices representing parents, charities. They heard from the teaching profession. They also heard from a lot of academic experts who've done research on things like how reliable are Ofsted judgments. And of course, they heard from Ofsted itself about how its resources have been cut back over the years. So they heard a very thorough range of evidence. And what's really striking is the strength of this report. They say that they heard evidence that the system is now perceived as being toxic, that the word that head teachers used in private meetings that the MPs had with them, the word they used most often was terror. And they felt that if you're going to have an inspection that is just 2 days, which is what Ofsted does now, rather than maybe almost a week, which is what it would have done, say, 10, 12 years ago, you're hanging an awful lot on it. And they questioned whether short and formulaic reports, that is all the inspectors have time to do, really help parents at all. And you're hanging a lot, the MPs are suggesting, on those 1 or 2 word judgments. And they're really clear in saying that those should now be looked at again. They should go, and another system should be devised for deciding when the government does need to step in, to intervene, if a school is truly failing in every respect.
So in terms of these recommendations, then, is it broadly what people were expecting to hear, or have they gone much further than people expected?
I think that they are stronger than maybe the teaching profession and head teachers expected. They're very unequivocal. This committee of MPs, and it's worth saying the majority on the committee is of Conservative MPs. They are basically saying that the government and the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, need to rethink those 1 and 2 word judgments, and that there is a consensus that after 30 years of the system we've had now, that we need to look again at school inspection to make sure that it's fit for what it can do now, and it's providing good and clear information for parents. So it's gone further, it's stronger, and it does create a situation where pretty much everyone now is calling for an alternative to those 1 and 2 word judgments. The Labour Party are proposing a report card system with strengths and weaknesses. The government so far has said that it likes the clarity and the simplicity of those judgments.
And in terms of what happened with Ruth Perry, this change to the being judged on safeguarding alone is huge, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And, you know, one of the things that happened when Julia Waters, Ruth Perry's sister, first started speaking out was head teachers started getting in touch with the BBC about their own experiences. And so we came across schools that, in one case, a school within 1 term had gone from good to inadequate and back to good again, according to Ofsted, leaving the parents utterly puzzled. The Leeds school that we heard from this morning, again, had gone from good to inadequate because the inspector didn't like the way the information was recorded on a computer system, and then back to good again within 3 months. But the experience had left the head teacher and the deputy head teacher so shredded, frankly, with stress and disillusioned with a system that could put their school through the ringer over a space of just a few months, whereas most parents, I think, would know that a school might change over years, that they're both now leaving the profession.
Well, Ruth Perry's sister, Professor Julia Waters, is also with us. Good morning to you, Julia. What do you make of the inquiry's findings?
It's finally a kind of really high-level vindication of what I've been arguing for, and so many others have been arguing for the past year, and I know for longer than the past year. I imagine that there will be hundreds, thousands of teachers and head teachers around the country cheering at their radios and TV sets this morning that finally their voice has been heard and that action is being urged to address not just my concerns, the concerns of the vast, vast majority of the teaching profession.
And bittersweet for you, obviously, seeing these changes, particularly, as I was just saying to Branwen there, on the safeguarding issue.
Yeah. I mean, I knew all along from what Ruth told me, and then it became glaringly obvious throughout the inquest, having seen all the Ofsted's evidence base and the statements from Ruth's colleagues and so on. I knew that Ruth's school wasn't inadequate, that the leadership there wasn't inadequate. The parents of Caversham Primary knew that. But to see the terrible flaws in the evidence base for that inspection, the frankly ludicrous presumptions that were made by the inspectors on the basis of really flimsy evidence, little gaps in paperwork and record keeping not quite up to date and so on. It was upsetting to see that. But now that's recognised, that should never have happened. I mean, it's written in the Education Select Committee's report. The Department for Education's response to the Coroner's Prevention of Future Deaths report also said that should not happen. A school should not be judged inadequate, have that terrible word applied to it, unless there are fundamental failings. And clearly that was not the case at Caversham Primary, and it's not the case in many other schools that I've heard from as well.
Those words that were used, toxic, terror, is there still work to be done?
Yes. I mean, one of the things that the report doesn't address and is going to be very hard for the new Chief Inspector to address is the culture at Ofsted. I mean, many of the people who for the past year have been defending the status quo against all odds, have been trying to discredit what I've been saying, what the teaching profession has been saying, were misleading during the inquest. Many of those people are still in post. I don't believe that a bit of training is going to be sufficient to turn around an organisation that, yes, is perceived as toxic, and to rebuild the trust that's needed from the teaching profession and from parents in that inspectorate. The culture is deeply and widely problematic, and that's going to take a long time and some very strong leadership from the new Chief Inspector to put right.
And of course, these recommendations that we're talking about, the Department for Education saying they'll give careful consideration to. So, not home and dry on even those things, really.
No, I've had, I think it's now 18 hours of meetings in the Department for Education over the past year, 10 or 11 of those with Gillian Keegan in person, sitting right next to her. And whilst there has been movement and there has been recognition that something went terribly wrong at Caversham Primary School and that mustn't be allowed to happen again, there has consistently been this frustrating sticking point around single word judgments. And I fear that the government may still, however untenable their position, still try to dig their heels in and refuse to change that, and to trot out the same lines about clarity and simplicity for parents and so on. I think now that this cross-parliamentary inquiry reveals how untenable that situation is, and the government, the Secretary of State herself, will not do themselves any favours if they still refuse to budge.
Okay, and this, of course, in possibly an election year, which all could change again. Really good to talk to you. Thank you very much for spending some time with us this morning. That's Professor Julia Waters there, Ruth Perry's sister, and our education editor, Branwen Jeffries, on the latest recommendations that have come in on how Ofsted should be going forwards.
Alan, thank you. 23 minutes to 9 now. School performance should not be summarised in one or two words chosen by school inspectors working for Ofsted. That's the conclusion of an all-party committee of MPs who've been reviewing complaints about the system following the death last year of Ruth Perry, a head whose primary school in Reading was rated inadequate, having previously been labelled outstanding. The coroner at the inquest into her death warned that further deaths could follow unless action was taken. We're joined on the line by Ruth Perry's sister, who since her death has campaigned for change in the way that Ofsted carries out its inspections. She is Professor Julia Waters. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Professor Waters, do you believe that simply changing the word or words used would be enough? Or is it the very approach to Ofsted inspections that was so critical to your sister's decision to take her life?
I don't think that the report that's come out this morning is suggesting just to change vocabulary. It is a call for a fundamental change to the way that inspections are carried out. And clearly one of the emblematic features of the current inspection is this one or two word judgments that are used to sum up a whole school. And clearly, I think anybody who sort of spends more than a minute thinking about that will realise how reductive that is, that one word, whatever that word is, can never sum up the complexities of the school and can never give parents an accurate picture of the school that their child
but you think
is
it's
going to.
Emblematic of what in Ofsted's approach?
Of a high-handed, rushed, subjective, punitive approach that frankly treats teachers and head teachers with contempt, that has a lack of trust in their ability to see what areas in their own schools need improvement. No school is perfect. Every school has areas to improve, but coming in with this, one word based on a 2-day inspection by 2 or 3 inspectors who may well, as the report highlights, have less experience, may have no experience in the kinds of school that they are inspecting.
Now,
it's problematic.
You've met with the new head of Ofsted.
I have.
Do you sense that there will be a change of culture?
I had a long and very productive meeting with Sir Martin Oliver, and yes, was reassured that he genuinely recognises, as a former head teacher himself, which makes a massive difference, he recognises that there are flaws in the current system. He recognises there's been a complete breakdown in trust between Ofsted and the teaching profession. And he told me that he had taken the job because he wants to bring about change.
But the problem presumably comes with the politics, because what the politicians will say to you is this is a tool not for teachers. It's a tool for parents. It's a tool of accountability for people who run our schools. It is meant to help parents to pick and choose where they go, as well as to hold heads to account. And they will worry that you may end up watering down that process in the attempt to make it a more collaborative process.
You did say the point there, it's meant to be helpful. it is meant to be helpful. My argument, and that now of a cross-party committee of MPs, is that it's not helpful. A single word judgment is reductive, it's misleading, and as my sister's case so tragically demonstrates, it's dangerous.
Professor Julia Waters, I'm so sorry, Professor Julia Waters, Ruth Perry's sister. Thank you very much for joining us.
The government should stop the use of single-word judgments in Ofsted's grading of schools in England. That's according to a group of MPs. The Commons Education Committee said relations between the watchdog and teachers had become extremely strained following head teacher Ruth Perry's suicide last year. Ruth's sister, Professor Julia Waters, told ITV News that she hoped it'll prevent other tragedies in the future. She spoke to our social affairs correspondent, Stacey Foster.
Today, everyone, we are going to look at the learning question. What are my rights and responsibilities?
They're expecting a visit from Ofsted at Flakefleet Primary School. The last time inspectors were here, they thought it was good.
We're due any minute. I wasn't sure whether it was going to be today. It's been 5 years since the last one.
The head here has publicly criticised Ofsted's approach to using single words to describe schools.
Are you glad you've spoken out?
Yeah, I am glad that I've spoken out. I think it's shown other people that they're not on their own. We're not in the minority. I think the single word judgments is too high stakes. It could be a supportive, constructive process that genuinely makes lives better for millions of kids across the country.
As well as scrapping single word judgments, the Education Select Committee recommends inspectors spend more time in a school and provide a more in-depth report afterwards. MPs also recommend increasing the notice period from 1 to 5 days. A year ago, head teacher Ruth Perry took her own life after her school went from outstanding to inadequate. Her sister has been campaigning for change.
What do you think Ruth would have made of this?
I hope she'd be proud that I'm trying to make something change, to make sure that no one else has to go through what she and so many others have been through. It shouldn't have taken someone's death. It shouldn't have taken a bereaved family to speak out, to make change happen. That Ofsted should have been listening to the teaching profession all along and taking their concerns and their complaints seriously. And if they had, I wouldn't be here. Ruth would.
The Department for Education has stuck to its stance that single word judgments are useful for parents, but this new report says actually there's limited evidence to support that. So for the first time you have a group of people who are not teachers saying that these judgments have got to go.
The new Chief Inspector of Schools will visit Flakefleet Primary and others over the next few months. But it's not within his power to scrap single word judgments. That's a matter for the government. Stacey Foster, ITV News, Lancashire.
MPs have called for an end to single-word Ofsted grades for school inspections. It comes after the death of primary school head teacher Ruth Perry. Ruth took her own life after an Ofsted inspection in 2022, which graded her school as inadequate. Well, earlier this month, Ofsted apologised for its role in Ruth's death. The school has since been regraded as good. Well, Ruth's sister, Julia Waters, joins me now in the studio. Julia, thank you so much for coming in to talk to us. You've been a force to be reckoned with on behalf of your sister to try and effect change. First of all, I want to talk about Ruth. You saw firsthand what the Ofsted inspection system did to her. She unravelled before your eyes. Can you give me an idea of what she was going through before she took her own life, Julia?
Well, you just said that I'm a force to be reckoned with. Ruth was my sister. We were quite similar. She was, and one of her colleagues described her as a tough cookie. She's quite resilient. She was very experienced. She was very well respected. And that Ofsted inspection just completely destroyed her. It was instant, really, both during and then after the inspection, and the long, long, long wait she had all over the Christmas holiday, still waiting for the report to come out.
and not being able to share the judgment with anybody else, because Ofsted forbade it. It just corroded her. You could sort of see her whole sort of sense of being, unravelling, you used that word. It was like that, and there was nothing we could do, try as we might, to put it right. The harm had been done, and then there weren't structures in place to support her and help her from the people who might have been able to do that.
Julia, there's been a lot of concentration on this one-word grading, and for those who aren't aware, Ruth's primary school had the highest rating, and then in that one inspection went to the lowest. And you talk there about the fact that she knew before she could tell any of her employees, any of the parents, that this had happened. And that was part of the Ofsted system, that's the way it was. And to appeal an Ofsted decision is a very complicated, not weighted in favour of the school kind of process. The Education Committee has been taking a look at this, and they've said more action is needed. But there is widespread and deep concern about the inspection system. So much focus on this one-word grading, but there's more to it than that, isn't there?
There's so much more, and the report highlights that as well. The one-word judgment is the most obvious manifestation of a deeply flawed system. And it's the thing that everybody sort of hooks onto. It's the thing that up till now the government has been absolutely categorical, they won't shift on. And it's the thing that's used to divide people. So this to set up this fake division between parents on the one hand and teachers on the other, teachers' welfare on one hand and children's welfare on the other, when we're all concerned about the same things. Parents want the best for their children, teachers and head teachers want the best for the children in their schools. And teachers and head teachers' welfare is inseparable from the welfare of the pupils whom they teach and take care of. So the word being used as this sort of lazy throwaway thing that, it's useful for parents. It's inaccurate.
But also what I didn't realise is if you get the lowest rating, whatever that issue is, it could be sorted out within a couple of months before the actual grading is published. But the Ofsted system doesn't allow for that wiggle room.
Or didn't. I mean, that's one of the things. I think it's a significant change that the report says that you should only get inadequate if a school is fundamentally failing to keep children safe, which was manifestly not the case at Caversham Primary School. There were issues around paperwork, and that was enough.
Well, Ofsted have apologised. They have a new chief, Sir Martin Oliver. Has he reached out to you?
Yeah, I've had a meeting. I've had a long meeting and email exchanges and promises of further meetings. Do you feel you're being listened to? Yeah, definitely. I think the major difference between him and his predecessor that should reassure the teaching profession is that he was a teacher and a head teacher himself. He's been on the receiving end of Ofsted inspections, both good and bad. And he seems genuinely committed to change, says that's why he took on the role. So yes, I had a almost 3-hour meeting with him. He listened to my concerns. He said my list of concerns were similar to his list of concerns, which actually is similar to the list of concerns in the Parliamentary Enquiry report that came out today. Yeah,
because Ofsted said, they're going to give these recommendations careful consideration. And from the discussions you've had, you believe, from what you've heard from them, that they're going to take it seriously. All of us know a teacher. All of us have had that conversation with a teacher about, I've got an Ofsted inspection next week. They're working over the weekend, prepping. We've seen the stress. We perhaps don't understand it unless we're in it or we're living with someone going through it. But after Ruth's death, you had so many people reach out to you detailing similar experiences, and it harks back to this system, that the Education Committee said there is widespread and deep concern. What have teachers been saying to you? Well, one of the words that the Education Select Committee picked up on that was recurrent in their conversations with teachers was terror
I mean, actually, terror. It's not just, a little bit of mild stress and anxiety, terror at Ofsted. I've been contacted by hundreds of teachers and head teachers, but it's particularly the head teachers. The head teacher is responsible, has a duty of care to his or her employees, the rest of the members of staff, which is not to say that Ofsted isn't stressful for all staff. It really is. But who's looking after the head teacher? They're in this very vulnerable and isolated position at the top of a school with the parents looking to them, the local community looking to them, their staff looking to them, their name over the door of the school, their name on the Ofsted report. My sister felt deeply, deeply, deeply responsible for that judgment. And there was no one really looking out for her and really able to give her the support she needed and the reassurance she needed that she was a great teacher and a great head teacher and, she would always have a role in the local authority or whatever. No, she was terrified she was going to lose her job, which has been one of the sort of almost automatic, likely consequences of an inadequate or two requires improvement judgments. And that's another thing that the report picks up on as not right. It's too high stakes. You shouldn't live in fear of losing your job on the basis of a 2-day inspection.
Yeah. As you said, terror amongst teachers in so many cases for Ofsted reports, and you raise a really good question, who's looking after the teachers, particularly head teachers? Julia, thank you so much. Pushing this on your sister's behalf. We're so sorry for your loss, but thank you so much for speaking up on behalf of your sister and for other teachers. Thank you. Really appreciate your time.